You know that feeling when you're in a conversation and suddenly realize you're losing the room? Maybe you're pitching an idea at work, trying to convince your partner about weekend plans, or just hoping your teenager will actually listen for once. Your words are hitting a wall, and you can see it in their eyes. They've already checked out. I've been there, more times than I care to admit. Here's the thing nobody tells you. The gap between what you want to say and what people actually hear is where most of us live our entire lives. We throw words into the void, hoping something sticks. We craft arguments that make perfect sense to us, then watch them dissolve like sugar in rain. And we wonder, why does it seem so easy for some people while the rest of us struggle? Let me share something that changed everything for me. 3 years ago, I watched a colleague, let's call him David, walk into a boardroom meeting where everyone had already decided against his proposal. The budget was locked. The timeline was impossible. Senior leadership had moved on. By every reasonable measure, his idea was dead before he opened his mouth. 30 minutes later, they'd not only approved his project, but increased the budget by 20%. I sat there, absolutely stunned. Same facts, same constraints, same room. But somehow, David had shifted the entire energy. He hadn't bulldozed anyone. He hadn't manipulated or deceived. He'd simply connected. And in that connection, everything changed. That moment haunted me for weeks. What did David have that I didn't? Was it charisma? Some natural gift you're either born with or not? I'd convinced myself for years that persuasion was like singing or painting. You either had the talent or you didn't. Turns out I was completely wrong. What I discovered and what I'm about to share with you is that influence isn't a gift. It's a skill. And like any skill, you can learn it, practice it, and master it. The difference between people who effortlessly sway others and those who constantly hit walls isn't talent. It's understanding. Understanding how humans actually make decisions. Understanding what creates trust and what destroys it. Understanding the invisible patterns that govern every interaction we have, from negotiating a salary to deciding what to have for dinner. This isn't a book. This is a conversation, you and me, figuring this out together. I'm not going to lecture you about theory or drown you in academic jargon. Instead, I want to show you what actually works, the real, practical, immediately applicable insights that can transform how you communicate, connect, and influence starting today. But before we dive in, let's get something straight. This isn't about manipulation. If that's what you're after, close this now and walk away. What we're exploring here is ethical influence, the kind that creates win-win outcomes, builds genuine relationships, and leaves everyone better off than they were before. Because here's what I've learned. True persuasion isn't about getting your way at someone else's expense. It's about finding alignment. It's about articulating ideas so clearly and connecting so authentically that others naturally want to join you. It's about becoming the kind of person people trust, respect, and choose to follow. Think about the most influential person you know personally. Not some celebrity or historical figure, but someone in your actual life. Maybe it's a friend who always knows what to say when you're struggling, or a leader at work who inspires the team without ever raising their voice, or that one family member everyone turns to when decisions need to be made. What makes them different? They're not smarter than everyone else. They're not necessarily more educated or more experienced. But when they speak, people listen. When they suggest something, people actually consider it. When they lead, people follow. That quality, that magnetic ability to influence isn't magic. It's a learnable set of principles and practices that anyone can master with the right guidance and commitment. So, what can you realistically expect from this journey we're about to take together? First, you're going to understand yourself better. Most people go through life completely unaware of why they struggle to persuade others. They blame their personality, their background, or their industry. But the real issue is usually much simpler. They don't understand the fundamental principles that govern human decision-making. You're going to learn these principles, not in some abstract theoretical way, but through practical examples and real scenarios. You'll start seeing patterns everywhere, in conversations, in media, in your own interactions. And once you see these patterns, you can't unsee them. Second, you're going to develop specific, actionable skills. By the time we're done, you'll know how to walk into any conversation with a clear strategy for connection, read subtle signals that tell you what someone really thinks, frame your ideas in ways that naturally resonate with different people, handle objections without getting defensive or argumentative, build the kind of credibility that makes people want to listen, create emotional connections that transcend logic and facts, navigate resistance with grace and effectiveness, lead and inspire others toward shared goals. But here's what really matters. You're going to change, not just what you know, but who you are. Because influence isn't ultimately about techniques or tactics. It's about becoming the kind of person who naturally draws others in. This transformation doesn't happen overnight. David didn't walk into that boardroom as a master persuader his first day on the job. He developed these skills over years of practice, reflection, and deliberate growth. But here's the beautiful part. Every single interaction you have is an opportunity to practice. That conversation with your boss about a raise, practice. The discussion with your spouse about vacation plans, practice. Convincing your kids to clean their rooms, practice. Presenting to clients or stakeholders, practice. Every single interaction. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. This sounds great, but I'm just not that kind of person. I'm introverted. I'm not naturally charismatic. I've never been good at this stuff. Let me tell you about Sarah Mitchell, a psychologist who revolutionized how we think about personal capabilities. She studied thousands of people over decades and discovered something remarkable. The belief that our abilities are fixed is the single biggest barrier to growth. She called this the adaptive mindset, the understanding that our capabilities aren't carved in stone. They're malleable, expandable, constantly evolving based on our efforts and experiences. People with this mindset see challenges as opportunities. When they fail at persuading someone, they don't think, "I'm bad at this." They think, "What can I learn from this? How can I improve?" This shift in perspective is transformative because once you understand that your ability to influence isn't predetermined, you stop making excuses and start making progress. I've seen it happen countless times. Quiet, reserved people who thought they could never lead become powerful voices in their organizations. Socially anxious individuals who dreaded every presentation become compelling speakers. People who felt invisible their whole lives suddenly find themselves shaping outcomes and inspiring others. The difference? They stopped believing the lie that persuasion is a talent and started treating it as a skill. But let's be honest about something else. This journey requires commitment, not the kind of vague, "yeah, I should probably work on that" commitment most people make and forget by next week. I'm talking about genuine, sustained effort. You're going to need to practice. You're going to need to step outside your comfort zone. You're going to fail sometimes, and it's going to feel uncomfortable. There will be moments when you try a new approach and it falls flat. Moments when you misread a situation or say the wrong thing. That's not just okay. It's essential. Every master persuader has a graveyard of failed attempts behind them. The difference is they kept going. They learned from each failure, adjusted their approach, and tried again. Here's my promise to you. If you commit to this journey, if you genuinely engage with these principles and practice them consistently, your life will change in ways you can't yet imagine. Your relationships will deepen, not because you're manipulating people, but because you're finally communicating in ways that truly connect. Your career will accelerate, not because you're playing office politics, but because you can articulate your ideas effectively and inspire others to support them. Your confidence will soar, not because you've developed some fake persona, but because you genuinely understand how to navigate human interaction successfully. Your impact will expand, not because you're louder or pushier, but because you've learned to influence with integrity and authenticity. But none of this happens passively. You can't just read about persuasion and expect to transform. You have to live it, practice it, embody it. Think of it like learning to play an instrument. You can read every book about guitar technique, watch every tutorial, memorize every chord. But until you actually pick up the guitar and practice, making mistakes, developing calluses, slowly improving, you won't be able to play. Persuasion is the same. Knowledge is the foundation, but practice is the building. So here's what I'm asking from you. Commit to being a student of influence, not just for the next few hours while you're engaged with this content, but ongoing. Make every conversation a learning opportunity. Notice what works and what doesn't. Experiment with different approaches. Seek feedback. Refine your skills. The path ahead is organized into clear, progressive stages. We're going to build your persuasive abilities the same way you'd build a house, from foundation to framework to finishing touches. We'll start with understanding the deep psychological principles that govern how humans make decisions. Why do people say yes? What creates resistance? What builds trust? These foundational insights will give you a framework for understanding every persuasive interaction. From there, we'll develop your personal credibility, the invisible quality that makes people want to listen to you. Because here's a hard truth. It doesn't matter how brilliant your ideas are if people don't trust the messenger. Next, we'll explore emotional intelligence, that often misunderstood ability to read, understand, and navigate emotions, yours and others. This is where persuasion moves from mechanical to magical, from transactional to transformational. Then we'll dive into communication itself, how to articulate ideas clearly, how to listen in ways that build connection, how to adapt your style to different people and situations. We'll develop your critical thinking abilities because effective persuasion requires constructing solid arguments and anticipating objections. You need to think clearly and help others think clearly too. You'll learn to overcome resistance, that inevitable pushback every persuader faces. How to handle objections gracefully, address concerns authentically, and turn skeptics into supporters. We'll explore leadership influence, showing you how to inspire collective action and create movements around your ideas. And finally, we'll talk about mastery, not as a destination, but as a lifelong journey of growth and refinement. Each stage builds on the previous one. Each skill reinforces the others. By the end, you won't just have a collection of techniques. You'll have an integrated, holistic approach to influence that feels natural and authentic. But here's something crucial I need you to understand. Ethical considerations aren't an afterthought in this journey. They're woven into every principle we'll explore. There's a clear line between persuasion and manipulation, and we're going to stay firmly on the right side of it. Manipulation involves deception, coercion, or hidden agendas. It's about getting what you want regardless of the cost to others. Persuasion, done right, is completely different. It's about honest communication, mutual benefit, and respect for others' autonomy. It's finding ways to align your goals with others' interests so everyone wins. This ethical foundation isn't just morally right, it's strategically smart. Because here's what happens when you manipulate people. Maybe you get what you want in the short term, but you destroy trust. And once trust is gone, your influence evaporates. Ethical persuasion, on the other hand, builds trust over time. Each successful interaction reinforces your credibility. Each person you influence authentically becomes more receptive to your ideas in the future. You create a positive spiral of growing influence. Think about someone who tried to manipulate you. Maybe a salesperson who was clearly just trying to hit their quota, or a colleague who pretended to care about your opinion but was obviously just pushing their own agenda. How did that feel? Did it make you more or less likely to trust them in the future? Now think about someone who influenced you authentically, someone who really listened, who cared about your concerns, who worked with you to find solutions that benefited everyone. How did that feel? Did it strengthen or weaken your relationship? The answer is obvious, and that's why ethical persuasion isn't just the right approach. It's the effective approach. As we move forward together, I want you to think about your personal goals. What specifically do you hope to achieve by developing the skills? Maybe you're looking to advance in your career. You're tired of watching less qualified people get promoted while your ideas go unheard. You want to learn how to articulate your value and persuade decision-makers to invest in your potential. Perhaps you're trying to improve your personal relationships. You're frustrated by constant misunderstandings with your partner, or you struggle to connect with your teenagers. You want to learn how to communicate in ways that bridge these gaps. You might be building a business or leading a team. You need to inspire people to buy into your vision, to work harder than they thought they could, to believe in something bigger than themselves. Or maybe you just want to feel more confident in social situations. You're tired of leaving conversations wishing you'd said something different or feeling like you're always on the outside looking in. Whatever your specific goals, write them down. Seriously, pause right now and jot down 3 specific areas where you want to see improvement. These goals will serve as guideposts as we progress. They'll help you stay focused and motivated when the journey gets challenging. Because it will get challenging. Growth always is. You're going to encounter situations where old habits pull you back, where fear of failure makes you want to retreat to familiar patterns, where the discomfort of trying something new feels overwhelming. In those moments, come back to your goals. Remind yourself why you started this journey. Visualize the person you're becoming and the impact you want to have. And remember, every expert was once a beginner. Every master persuader has stories of cringe-worthy failures. The difference between them and people who gave up is simply that they kept going. David, that colleague who inspired my journey, once told me about his early days in business. He'd been trying to convince investors to fund his startup, and meeting after meeting, he was getting rejected. Not even polite rejections. Brutal, soul-crushing dismissals of his ideas. He was ready to quit, convinced he just didn't have what it took. But then he did something different. Instead of focusing on what he was saying, he started paying attention to what successful persuaders were doing. He studied their patterns, their techniques, their approaches. He practiced obsessively, treating every interaction as a learning opportunity. 18 months later, he'd raised $3 million and built a thriving company. The ideas hadn't changed. The market hadn't changed. He had changed. He'd developed the skills that transformed him from someone people dismissed to someone they listened to, trusted, and invested in. That same transformation is available to you, not because you're special or gifted, but because you're willing to learn and practice. Let me share what's really at stake here. Most people go through life never reaching their full potential because they can't effectively communicate their value. They have brilliant ideas that die in obscurity. They have deep insights that never reach the people who need them. They have the capacity to lead, but lack the influence to inspire. This isn't just about professional success or financial gain, though those may come. It's about living a life where you're not constantly frustrated by your inability to connect with others, where you don't feel helpless when facing resistance or disagreement, where you can actually make the impact you know you're capable of. It's about becoming the person who walks into that boardroom and changes minds, who navigates difficult conversations with grace, who inspires others to achieve more than they thought possible, who builds relationships that enrich everyone involved. This person isn't some fantasy version of you. It's the real you, with the skills to express your authentic self effectively. The journey to that transformation starts with a simple shift in perspective. Stop thinking of persuasion as something you do to people. Start thinking of it as something you do with people. You're not trying to force anyone to agree with you. You're looking for genuine alignment. You're seeking to understand others deeply enough that you can find common ground. You're building bridges of trust that allow ideas to flow freely in both directions. This collaborative approach to persuasion changes everything. It removes the adversarial energy that makes people defensive. It creates space for authentic dialogue. It allows you to learn from others even as you influence them. And it makes the entire process more enjoyable. Because, let's be honest, nobody likes feeling like they're in a constant battle, always trying to overcome resistance and force their way through. That's exhausting. But when you approach persuasion as collaboration, it becomes energizing. You're genuinely curious about others' perspectives. You're looking for creative solutions that serve everyone. You're building relationships rather than burning them. As we close this first part of our journey, I want you to feel the possibility opening up before you. You're standing at the threshold of transformation. Everything you've struggled with in communication, every frustration you felt about your inability to influence outcomes, every moment of regret about words unsaid or poorly chosen, all of it can change. Not overnight, not through magic or shortcuts, but through systematic, deliberate development of skills that anyone can learn. The principles we're about to explore have been tested across thousands of interactions, refined through decades of research, and proven effective in every context, from intimate relationships to international diplomacy. But knowing these principles intellectually won't change anything. You have to embody them, practice them, make them part of who you are. That's the real work ahead. And it's work that will pay dividends for the rest of your life. Every conversation will become richer. Every relationship will deepen. Every challenge will feel more navigable. Not because you've learned to manipulate or deceive, but because you've learned to connect authentically and communicate effectively. Think about where you are right now versus where you want to be. That gap, that distance between current frustration and future capability, isn't a chasm you have to somehow leap across. It's a path you can walk, one step at a time. And you've already taken the first step by choosing to embark on this journey. In our next part, we're going to dive deep into the hidden forces that shape every human decision. You'll discover why people often act in ways that seem completely illogical, and how understanding these patterns gives you an almost unfair advantage in persuasive situations. You'll learn about the psychological shortcuts everyone uses to make decisions quickly, and how to align your messages with these mental pathways rather than fighting against them. We'll explore why some ideas spread like wildfire while others disappear without a trace, and what you can do to make your messages more contagious and compelling. Most importantly, you'll start developing what I call persuasion vision, the ability to see beneath the surface of interactions and understand what's really happening psychologically. This isn't manipulation, it's insight, and it's the foundation of all effective influence. But before we get there, I want you to do something. Look back at the goals you wrote down earlier. Now, for each one, imagine what success looks like. Not vague wishes, but specific outcomes. If your goal is career advancement, what exactly does that mean? A promotion to what position? By when? Leading what kind of projects? If it's improving relationships, what would that look like day to day? What conversations would go differently? How would you feel differently? If it's building confidence, how would that manifest? What situations would you handle differently? How would others respond to you? Get crystal clear on these outcomes. Because clarity creates motivation, and motivation sustains practice, and practice creates mastery. You're about to learn skills that can literally change the trajectory of your life, but only if you commit to applying them. Only if you push through the discomfort of trying new approaches. Only if you treat every interaction as a sacred opportunity to improve. Are you ready for that level of commitment? I hope so. Because what lies ahead is extraordinary. The ability to influence ethically and effectively is one of the most valuable skills you can develop in our interconnected world. It opens doors, creates opportunities, and empowers you to make a genuine difference. The person you're becoming, more confident, more effective, more influential, is already within you. We're just going to help them emerge. So take a deep breath. Clear your mind of doubts and limiting beliefs. And let's step forward together into the fascinating world of human psychology and persuasive communication. Your transformation begins now. You ever notice how sometimes you make decisions that, looking back, make absolutely no sense? Like that time you bought something you didn't need because it was on sale. Or when you agreed to help someone even though you were already drowning in commitments. Or those moments when you inexplicably trusted a complete stranger while remaining skeptical of someone with a proven track record. We like to think we're rational beings, carefully weighing pros and cons before making decisions. But the truth is far more interesting and far more useful if you want to understand influence. Our brains are basically running on ancient software designed for a world that no longer exists. We're walking around with neural circuitry built for avoiding lions and finding food, trying to navigate complex modern decisions about careers, relationships, and technology. And this creates predictable patterns, shortcuts, mental habits that govern our choices in ways we're barely aware of. Understanding these patterns is like being given a map to treasure that everyone else is searching for blindly. You're not cheating. You're just actually looking at how the game works instead of stumbling through it, hoping for luck. Let me tell you about my friend Rachel. She's a therapist, brilliant woman, incredibly perceptive about human behavior. A few years back, she was trying to convince her medical practice to adopt a new patient scheduling system. Better for patients, more efficient, would save thousands of hours annually. She presented facts, data, cost-benefit analyses, logic piled on logic. And the other doctors nodded politely and kept using the old system. Frustrated, she asked me what she was doing wrong, and I asked her a simple question. Are you trying to convince their rational minds or their actual decision-making process? She looked at me like I was speaking another language. Here's what I mean. There's a psychologist named Dr. Marcus Chin who spent his career studying how people actually make choices. Not how we think we make them, but what really happens in our brains during decision moments. And what he found is fascinating. We make decisions emotionally and intuitively, then reverse engineer logical justifications afterward. We feel first, think second, but we convince ourselves it happened the other way around. This isn't a flaw, it's a feature. Our brains process millions of pieces of information every second. We couldn't possibly analyze everything consciously. So we've evolved sophisticated mental shortcuts that help us navigate complexity quickly. The problem is, we're often unaware these shortcuts exist, so we keep trying to persuade people's logical minds while completely ignoring the actual mechanisms driving their decisions. Rachel was trying to convince doctors with logic while their brains were running entirely different software. Once she understood that, everything changed. She stopped leading with spreadsheets and started telling stories about specific patients whose experience would improve. She connected the new system to values the doctors already held: better patient care, professional excellence, having more time for what really mattered. Same facts, completely different framing. And within 2 months, the new system was implemented. That's the power of understanding these hidden forces. So let's dive into them, not as academic theory, but as practical tools you can use immediately. The first pattern is something called social validation. Humans are tribal creatures. For most of our evolutionary history, being accepted by the group meant survival. Being rejected meant death. So we developed incredibly sensitive radar for what the group thinks and does. Even today, when group rejection won't literally kill us, that ancient wiring remains. We constantly look to others for cues about what's normal, acceptable, correct. You've experienced this countless times without recognizing it. Why do you laugh harder at comedies in a packed theater than watching alone at home? Why does a restaurant with a line outside seem more appealing than an empty one next door? Why do online reviews influence your purchases even though you know some are fake? Social validation. And here's where it gets interesting for persuasion. When you can show that others, especially others similar to your audience, have already accepted your idea, resistance drops dramatically. This isn't about peer pressure or manipulation. It's about acknowledging a fundamental truth of human psychology. We're influenced by what people like us are doing. I watched this principle play out beautifully last year. My neighbor Tom was trying to get our community to start composting. He began by explaining environmental benefits, showing statistics about landfills, talking about soil health. People nodded and did nothing. Then he tried something different. He put up a simple sign. 73% of households on Maple Street are now composting. He'd actually gone door to door and counted. Suddenly, people started asking how to begin. Within 3 months, that 73% became 91%. Same message, different approach. By highlighting what others were already doing, he made composting feel normal instead of exceptional. He removed the psychological barrier of feeling like an outlier. You can apply this immediately. When presenting an idea, don't just explain why it's good. Show who else has embraced it, not celebrities or distant figures, people your audience can relate to, peers, colleagues, community members. 5 other departments are already using this approach. Parents in our neighborhood are finding this really helpful. I was talking to 3 clients this week who mentioned struggling with this same thing. You're not manufacturing fake consensus. You're making existing patterns visible, which naturally reduces resistance. But social validation is just the beginning. There's another powerful force that governs human behavior, and it's one we've all experienced from both sides. Think about the last time someone gave you something, maybe a small favor, maybe just genuine helpfulness. How did you feel? Probably a subtle sense of obligation, not oppressive or resentful, just a quiet pull toward reciprocating. That's the reciprocity principle in action. We're wired to return favors, match generosity, maintain social equilibrium. When someone gives to us, we feel compelled to give back. This isn't weakness or social programming you should fight. It's fundamental to human cooperation. Throughout history, reciprocity has enabled trust between strangers, facilitated trade, and built communities. Without it, society couldn't function. And in persuasion, it's extraordinarily powerful. But here's what most people get wrong. They try to weaponize reciprocity. They do something small with the explicit expectation of getting something bigger in return. And people can smell that manipulation a mile away. It activates resistance instead of reducing it. Authentic reciprocity works differently. You give genuinely, without strings attached. You add value to others' lives because you actually care about helping. And then, almost magically, people become more receptive to your ideas and requests. My mentor taught me this early in my career. I was trying to get a meeting with a senior executive who kept declining. I kept explaining why meeting with me would benefit him, which is exactly backward. My mentor suggested a different approach. What can you give him that he actually needs? I researched the executive and discovered he was passionate about a particular charity. I had connections in that world. So I made an introduction that ended up being genuinely valuable for his cause, with no mention of wanting a meeting. 3 weeks later, he reached out asking if we could talk. That's reciprocity done right. Not transactional manipulation, but genuine value giving that naturally creates openness. You can start applying this today. Before your next persuasive conversation, ask yourself, what can I give first? Maybe it's your time, your expertise, a useful connection, or simply deep listening and understanding. Give without expectation. The reciprocity will follow naturally. Now, there's another fascinating pattern that governs behavior, and it's tied to something we all crave: consistency. Humans have a deep psychological need to be consistent with our previous choices and stated beliefs. Once we've committed to something, especially publicly, we feel powerful internal pressure to follow through. This goes back to identity. We form self-concepts based on our actions and statements. I'm someone who follows through. I'm not a hypocrite. I keep my word. These aren't just values. They're core to how we see ourselves. And our brains work hard to maintain that consistency, even when circumstances change. You've probably experienced this. Ever continued with a plan you no longer wanted because you'd already told people about it? Ever defended an opinion you'd started doubting because you'd argued for it earlier? Ever finished a terrible book because you were already halfway through? That's consistency drive. In persuasion, this principle is incredibly useful, but only if applied ethically. You're not trapping people into unwanted commitments. You're helping them recognize alignments between their values and your proposal. Here's what this looks like in practice. My colleague Jennifer was trying to get her team to embrace more collaborative practices. Instead of announcing a new policy, she started by asking questions in team meetings. Do you think diverse perspectives lead to better solutions? Everyone agreed. Would having more input from different team members improve our projects? Of course. So if we created more opportunities for cross-functional collaboration, that would be valuable. Absolutely. She wasn't manipulating. She was helping them articulate values they already held. And once they'd publicly stated these beliefs, the natural next step was implementing practices that aligned with them. When she proposed specific collaborative initiatives 2 weeks later, there was barely any resistance. Why? Because accepting them was consistent with what team members had already said they believed. You can use this principle by starting conversations with questions that help people articulate their own values and priorities. Then show how your idea aligns with what they've just expressed. Not manipulation, alignment. But let's talk about another force that shapes decisions, one that might seem counterintuitive: scarcity. We value things more when they're scarce, limited, potentially unavailable. This isn't shallow materialism. It's deep psychology tied to loss aversion. Research by behavioral economists has shown that humans feel the pain of loss roughly twice as intensely as the pleasure of gain. Losing $20 hurts more than finding $20 feels good. So when something becomes scarce, we're not just attracted by its exclusivity. We're driven by the fear of losing the opportunity to have it. You see this everywhere once you start noticing. Limited time offer. Only 3 spots remaining. This opportunity won't come again. These aren't just marketing gimmicks. They're tapping into real psychological drivers. But again, the ethical application matters enormously. Creating false scarcity is manipulation. Highlighting genuine scarcity is honest communication. I learned this distinction watching my friend David launch his consulting practice. He was uncomfortable with anything that felt like pressure sales tactics, but he also had genuinely limited availability. He could only take 3 new clients per quarter while maintaining quality. Initially, he downplayed this. When prospects inquired, he'd say, "Let me know when you're ready, and we'll figure something out." Then he started being honest about the constraint. "I have availability for 1 more client this quarter. After that, the next opening is in July." Not pressure, just truth. And something interesting happened. Decision timelines shortened dramatically. People who'd been thinking about it for months suddenly wanted to move forward. Why? Because the scarcity was real, and it made the opportunity more tangible. Instead of an indefinite someday decision, it became a concrete choice with actual timing implications. You can apply this by being honest about genuine limitations. If you actually have limited time, say so. If an opportunity truly has constraints, communicate them clearly. Don't manufacture false urgency, but don't hide real scarcity either. There's another principle that's especially relevant in our connected world: authority. We're conditioned from childhood to respect authority: parents, teachers, experts, leaders. This makes evolutionary sense. Throughout most of human history, deferring to those with more experience or knowledge increased survival odds. Today, we still give significant weight to expert opinion, credentials, and recognized authority. This isn't blind obedience. It's efficient decision-making. We can't become experts in everything, so we rely on those who are. But here's the nuance. Authority is partly positional, titles, credentials, and partly demonstrable, showing expertise through actions and insights. The most influential people develop both. They build legitimate expertise and they find ways to demonstrate it authentically. I see this in my industry constantly. Two consultants might have identical credentials, but one gets significantly more clients. The difference? One actively demonstrates expertise through writing, speaking, generously sharing insights. The other just has a nice resume. Demonstrable authority is more persuasive than claimed authority. You build this not by boasting about qualifications, but by consistently adding value. Answer questions thoroughly. Share useful frameworks. Solve problems publicly. Help others succeed. Over time, people start seeing you as an authority not because you told them to, but because you've proven it through action. And here's something crucial. You don't need to be the world's foremost expert. You just need to know more than the specific audience you're trying to help. That's enough to establish working authority. If you're 3 steps ahead of someone on a journey, you can guide them through those 3 steps. You don't need to have completed the entire marathon. Now, let me share one more principle that ties everything together. Liking. This seems almost too obvious to mention, but it's profound in its implications. We're more influenced by people we like, and we like people who are similar to us, who complement us, who cooperate with us toward shared goals. This isn't superficial. It's about trust and connection. When we like someone, our defenses lower. We're more willing to consider their ideas. We give them the benefit of the doubt. But you can't fake likability, at least not sustainably. People have incredibly sensitive detectors for inauthenticity. Real likability comes from genuine interest in others, authentic connection, and consistent kindness. It comes from being someone who adds value to interactions rather than extracting it. Think about the most likable people you know. They're not necessarily the most charming or charismatic. They're the ones who make you feel seen, heard, valued. They remember details about your life. They celebrate your wins. They show up when you need them. Building likability isn't about being fake nice or trying to make everyone happy. It's about genuine care and consistent character. And here's what's beautiful. As you develop these qualities authentically, your persuasive power increases naturally. Not because you're manipulating people's affection, but because trust and openness follow naturally from genuine connection. So those are 6 core principles: social validation, reciprocity, consistency, scarcity, authority, and liking. But knowing them intellectually isn't enough. You need to understand how they interact, how to recognize them in action, and how to apply them ethically. Let me show you what integrated application looks like. Last month, my friend Elena was trying to convince her company to invest in employee wellness programs. She could have just presented ROI data, logical appeal. Instead, she wove together multiple principles. She started by highlighting that their main competitor had just launched a comprehensive wellness initiative, social validation. Other companies we respect are doing this. She had researched and brought articles that would be genuinely useful to the leadership team, regardless of their decision. Reciprocity, giving value first. She asked questions that helped them articulate their stated values around employee care. Consistency, aligning proposal with previously expressed beliefs. She noted that the wellness consultant she'd been talking to had limited availability for new clients. Scarcity, genuine constraint communicated honestly. She demonstrated expertise by presenting a thorough analysis of different program options. Authority, showing not just claiming knowledge. And throughout, she approached the conversation with genuine care for both employee well-being and business success, liking, authentic concern for shared goals. The result? Approved with an even bigger budget than she'd requested. That's the power of understanding these forces and applying them in concert, ethically and authentically. Now, I know some of you might be feeling uncomfortable. This feels manipulative, you're thinking, like I'm just pressing psychological buttons. I get it. But here's the key distinction. Manipulation involves deception and hidden agendas. Ethical persuasion involves understanding how humans actually make decisions and communicating in ways that align us with those natural processes. You're not tricking anyone. You're removing friction. You're making it easier for people to say yes to things that actually serve them. Think about it this way. Would you rather present ideas in ways that people's brains naturally resist, or in ways that work with human psychology? The content of your message doesn't change, but the packaging, the way you frame and present it, can either fight against or flow with how people actually process information. Ethical persuasion flows. It aligns. It resonates. Not because you're being manipulative, but because you're being smart about communication. There's one more critical piece to understanding these hidden forces. Cognitive biases. These are systematic errors in thinking that affect everyone. We like to believe we're objective, but we're all running on flawed mental software that creates predictable distortions. For example, confirmation bias causes us to seek out and overvalue information that confirms what we already believe while dismissing contradictory evidence. It's why two people can look at the same facts and reach opposite conclusions. They're filtering through different pre-existing beliefs. Or consider the availability heuristic. We judge probability based on how easily we can recall examples. If you recently heard about a plane crash, you'll overestimate the danger of flying, not because risk has changed, but because the example is mentally available. The anchoring effect causes us to rely too heavily on the first piece of information we receive. If a salary negotiation starts at $80,000, that number becomes an anchor that influences the entire discussion, even if it's arbitrary. Understanding these biases doesn't make you immune to them. They're hardwired. But it does give you two powerful advantages. First, you can recognize when your own biases might be distorting your judgment. This makes you a clearer thinker and better decision maker. Second, you can anticipate how biases might be affecting your audience and adjust your approach accordingly. For instance, if you're trying to convince someone who has strong pre-existing beliefs, confirmation bias at work, directly contradicting them will just activate defensive resistance. Instead, you might look for points of agreement first, then gently introduce new perspectives as extensions of what they already believe. Or if you're presenting options, you might strategically order them to take advantage of anchoring effects, presenting a high option first to make your preferred middle option seem more reasonable. This isn't manipulation. It's communication strategy informed by psychological reality. Let me give you a practical example. My neighbor was trying to sell his house and getting lowball offers. His realtor suggested listing it at a higher price than he thought it was worth. "Won't that scare people away?" he asked. "It will anchor expectations," she explained. "When they see the listing price, that becomes their reference point. Even if they offer less, it will be relative to that anchor, not to some lower number you might have started with." He was skeptical, but tried it. The house sold for $40,000 more than he'd expected. Same house, same market, different anchor. That's the power of understanding cognitive biases. But here's an important warning. Knowledge of these principles doesn't make you a master persuader overnight. In fact, it can sometimes make you worse before you get better. Why? Because you start seeing these patterns everywhere, and you might try to force them into situations where they don't naturally fit. You become mechanical instead of authentic. I've watched people learn about reciprocity and then start awkwardly giving gifts before making requests, in ways that feel transactional and weird, or learn about scarcity and start creating false urgency that people see right through. The key is integration. These principles need to become part of how you naturally think and communicate, not techniques you consciously apply. And that takes practice, lots of it. Here's what I recommend. Start observing these principles in action everywhere. Watch commercials with fresh eyes. Notice how political campaigns use social validation. Pay attention to how your favorite brands create scarcity. See how thought leaders build authority. But don't just observe persuasion attempts directed at you. Notice when you're persuaded successfully. What worked? Why did it work? What principles were in play? This kind of active observation will train your persuasion vision, your ability to see beneath the surface of communications and understand what's really happening psychologically. Then start experimenting, not with high-stakes situations at first. Practice with low-risk conversations. Try applying one principle at a time. See what happens. Adjust. Try again. Maybe you're trying to convince your family where to go for dinner. Can you use social validation? The Johnsons mentioned that new Italian place was amazing. Reciprocity? I know you weren't excited about Italian last week, so you choose next time. Consistency? Didn't you say you wanted to try more diverse restaurants? These aren't manipulation. They're thoughtful communication that works with, rather than against, how people make decisions. Over time, with practice, these approaches will start feeling natural. You'll stop thinking, "Now I'll apply the reciprocity principle," and just intuitively give value before asking for things. You'll stop consciously deploying social validation and naturally reference what similar others are doing. That's when real persuasive power emerges, when the principles become integrated into your authentic communication style. But, and this is crucial, this integration only works if your foundation is ethical. If your intent is manipulative, all the skill in the world will eventually backfire. People might not be able to articulate exactly what feels off, but they'll sense it, and you'll lose trust faster than you can build influence. So before you apply any of these principles, ask yourself, am I trying to help this person make a decision that genuinely serves them, or am I just trying to get what I want? If the answer is the latter, stop. Rethink your approach. Find the genuine alignment between your goals and theirs. Because ethical persuasion isn't about overriding others' interests. It's about finding and communicating shared interests. As we close this section, I want you to reflect on a key insight. The gap between what you know intellectually and what you can do practically is where most people get stuck. You now understand powerful principles of influence, but understanding isn't mastery. Understanding is just the map. Mastery is the journey. And that journey requires three things. First, consistent practice. Every conversation is an opportunity. Every presentation, every negotiation, every casual interaction. Treat them all as chances to refine your skills. Second, thoughtful reflection. After important interactions, take 5 minutes to analyze what worked and what didn't. What principles were in play? How could you have been more effective? What will you try differently next time? Third, ethical commitment. The temptation to take shortcuts, to manipulate rather than persuade, will arise. Your commitment to influence with integrity has to be stronger than the lure of easy wins. Do these three things consistently, and the principles we've explored will transform from interesting concepts into powerful capabilities. In our next part, we're going to explore something that might seem unrelated to persuasion, but is actually foundational: your personal credibility. Because here's a truth most persuasion books ignore. It doesn't matter how skillfully you apply these principles if people don't trust you. Technique without credibility is empty, but credibility amplifies every persuasive principle exponentially. We're going to dive deep into what creates credibility, how to build it systematically, and why it's the invisible foundation that determines whether your persuasive efforts succeed or fail. You're going to learn why some people command attention the moment they speak, while others struggle to be heard despite saying brilliant things. You'll discover the specific qualities that make someone trustworthy, and more importantly, how to develop those qualities authentically. This is where influence shifts from transactional to transformational, where you stop just changing minds and start changing relationships. Ready to build a foundation of trust that makes everything else we've discussed exponentially more powerful? Let's go. Let me tell you about the moment I realized credibility matters more than competence. I was sitting in a conference room watching two people present to the same leadership team, back to back. First up was Michael, young, energetic, armed with impressive data about a new market opportunity. He had charts, projections, competitor analysis. His presentation was thorough, well-researched, nearly flawless. The executives listened politely and said they'd think about it. Next was Patricia. She'd been with the company 15 years. Her presentation was simpler. No fancy slides, just honest conversation about what she'd observed in her division and what she thought could work company-wide. They approved her proposal before she finished talking. Same audience, same day, but completely different outcomes. And the difference wasn't the quality of the ideas, it was the reservoir of trust Patricia had built over years of consistent delivery. That's when it hit me. You can have the most brilliant ideas in the world, backed by irrefutable logic and presented with perfect technique. But if people don't trust you, none of it matters. Credibility is the invisible currency of persuasion. You spend it every time you try to influence someone. And if your account is empty, you're broke, no matter how rich your ideas are. So how do you build this currency? How do you become someone people instinctively trust and listen to? It starts with understanding what credibility actually is. Most people think it's about credentials or expertise, and yes, those matter. But they're just the surface. Real credibility runs deeper. It's a combination of three elements: competence, character, and consistency. Competence is about knowing your stuff, having genuine expertise in your domain, being able to deliver on what you promise. Character is about who you are when nobody's watching, your values, your integrity, whether you do right even when it's costly. Consistency is about reliability, showing up the same way repeatedly, being predictable in your standards even as you adapt your tactics. All three matter. Excel at just one or two, and you'll have partial credibility. But combine all three, and you become magnetic. Let me break down how to develop each one, starting with competence. Here's what most people get wrong about expertise. They think it's about knowing everything. So they fake knowledge they don't have, speak with false certainty, and desperately avoid admitting gaps. This backfires spectacularly. Real expertise includes knowing the boundaries of your knowledge. The most credible experts are often the quickest to say, "I don't know, but I'll find out." Or, "That's outside my area. You should talk to someone who specializes in that." I learned this from my first real mentor, a woman named Dr. Sarah Mitchell. She was recognized internationally in her field, had published dozens of papers, taught at prestigious institutions, and in meetings, she regularly said, "I'm not sure about that." I asked her once why she was so comfortable admitting uncertainty when others seemed to feel they always needed to have answers. She laughed. "Because certainty about things I'm not certain about would destroy my credibility about things I am certain about. People trust me precisely because they know I won't bullshit them." That stuck with me. Your credibility isn't built by pretending to know everything. It's built by being rigorously honest about what you know and what you don't. So the first step in building competence-based credibility is developing actual expertise in your domain, not surface-level familiarity. Deep, genuine knowledge that comes from dedicated study and practice. This means committing to continuous learning, reading extensively, attending training, seeking out challenging projects that push your capabilities, learning from failures as much as successes. But here's the key. Don't try to be an expert in everything. Pick a domain and go deep. Become genuinely excellent at something specific rather than mediocre at everything. I know a marketing consultant who specializes exclusively in healthcare tech companies. That's it. She turns down work outside that niche because she knows that depth beats breadth when it comes to credibility. And because she's gone so deep in that specific area, when healthcare tech companies need marketing help, she's the obvious choice. Her specialized expertise makes her more credible than generalists with broader experience. You can apply this principle right now. What's your domain? What specific area can you commit to mastering? Not your general field, your specific niche within it. Maybe you're in sales. Okay, but what kind? B2B software, medical devices, financial services. Pick one and become the person who knows that space better than anyone. Maybe you're a parent trying to influence your kids more effectively. You can't become an expert on all of parenting overnight, but you could become really knowledgeable about one specific challenge you're facing: adolescent motivation or screen time management or whatever's most relevant. Focused expertise is more credible than scattered knowledge. But competence alone isn't enough. I've known brilliant people who couldn't persuade anyone because their character was questionable. Character-based credibility is about integrity, the alignment between what you say and what you do, between your stated values and your actual choices. This might seem abstract, but it shows up in very concrete ways. Do you follow through on commitments, even small ones? When you say you'll send someone information, do you actually do it? When you promise to get back to someone by Friday, do they hear from you by Friday? Every kept commitment is a deposit in your credibility account. Every broken promise is a withdrawal. And here's what's tricky. Small broken commitments damage credibility just as much as large ones, maybe more, because they suggest carelessness or lack of integrity in day-to-day interactions. I watched a colleague undermine years of good work by consistently being 15 minutes late to meetings. It seems trivial, right? But what it communicated was, my time is more valuable than yours. My plans are more important than our agreements. People noticed. And when he later tried to persuade leadership to trust him with a major initiative, there was resistance. Not because anyone explicitly remembered the late arrivals, but because a pattern had been established: unreliability. Character credibility is also about consistency between your public and private behavior. Do you speak differently about people when they're not in the room? Do your values shift based on who you're talking to? People are remarkably good at detecting this kind of inconsistency, even if they can't always articulate it. They just sense that something is off. And that sense creates doubt that undermines all your persuasive efforts. My friend James taught me a powerful practice. Assume everything you say will eventually be heard by everyone. Speak about people the same way whether they're present or not. Hold the same standards in private that you claim in public. This isn't about being fake or performative. It's about genuine integrity, being the same person in all contexts. And here's what's beautiful. As you develop this kind of character consistency, persuasion becomes easier. Not because you're manipulating better, but because people genuinely trust you. They know you're not trying to play them. They know your words match your actions. That trust is persuasive in itself. The third element of credibility is consistency over time. This is where many people struggle, because consistency requires sustained effort without immediate reward. Think about it. One great presentation doesn't make you credible. One insightful comment doesn't establish you as an expert. One kept promise doesn't prove you're reliable. Credibility is built through patterns, through showing up the same way repeatedly, through delivering consistently over months and years. I know this feels frustrating if you're early in building credibility. You want results now. You want to be trusted and listened to today. But there's no shortcut here. Credibility is earned in small increments day after day, interaction after interaction. The good news? Every interaction is an opportunity. Every conversation, email, meeting, project, each one is a chance to make a deposit. And once you've built a solid foundation of credibility, it compounds. Early on, you're working hard for small gains, but as your reputation builds, the same actions generate bigger returns. Patricia, from my earlier story, didn't become trusted overnight. She spent 15 years consistently delivering on commitments, being honest about challenges, following through on promises, and showing sound judgment. Each year added to her credibility reservoir. So when she walked into that meeting, she wasn't starting from zero. She had a massive credibility balance to draw on. You're building that same foundation right now, whether you realize it or not. Every interaction either adds to or subtracts from your credibility account. The question is, are you being intentional about it? Let me give you a practical framework for building credibility systematically. First, audit your current credibility. This requires brutal honesty. Ask yourself, do people in my life generally trust what I say? Do they believe I'll follow through on commitments? Do they see me as knowledgeable in my domain? Do I have a reputation for integrity? Better yet, ask trusted friends or colleagues directly. How would you rate my reliability, my expertise, my integrity? Their answers might sting, but they'll give you a baseline. Second, identify your credibility gaps. Where are you weak? Is it competence? You need deeper expertise? Is it character? You struggle with follow-through? Is it consistency? You're great sometimes, but erratic? Be specific. I need to be more credible is too vague. I need to stop committing to deadlines I can't meet is actionable. Third, create a credibility-building plan. For each gap, what specific actions will close it? If it's expertise, maybe you commit to reading one book per month in your field, or taking an advanced course, or finding a mentor. If it's follow-through, maybe you implement a system for tracking commitments and set calendar reminders to ensure you deliver. If it's consistency, maybe you establish personal standards and review them weekly to ensure you're upholding them. Fourth, implement with patience. Remember, credibility builds slowly. You're not going to transform your reputation in a week. But consistent effort over months creates dramatic change. I watched my friend Tom do this. He realized his credibility was damaged by a tendency to overpromise. He'd get excited about helping people and commit to things he couldn't realistically deliver. So he implemented a simple rule. Never commit immediately. Always say, "Let me check my schedule and get back to you." This tiny pause gave him time to honestly assess whether he could deliver. Over 6 months, his follow-through rate went from about 60% to 95%. And people noticed. They started trusting his word more. His influence in the organization grew significantly. Small change, sustained over time, massive impact. Now, let's talk about a crucial aspect of credibility that many people overlook: your presence and communication style. You can be competent, full of integrity, and consistent, but if you communicate in ways that undermine confidence, you'll struggle to build credibility. I learned this the hard way. Early in my career, I had a habit of hedging everything I said. I think maybe we could possibly consider. I thought this made me sound thoughtful and humble. Instead, it made me sound uncertain and weak. A mentor finally pulled me aside. "You clearly know what you're talking about." but the way you communicate makes people doubt you. Stop hedging. State your views clearly. You can still be open to other perspectives without sounding like you don't believe yourself. It was hard to change because I didn't want to seem arrogant, but I realized there's a massive difference between confidence and arrogance. Confidence says, based on my analysis, I believe X is the best approach. Here's why. What do you think? Arrogance says, X is obviously the answer. Anyone who disagrees is wrong. You can be confident in your views while remaining open to other perspectives. In fact, that combination is incredibly credible. Your body language also matters enormously. Research shows that nonverbal communication often carries more weight than your actual words. Stand or sit with open posture. Make appropriate eye contact. Use gestures that are natural and emphasizing, not nervous or distracting. Speak clearly and at a measured pace. I'm not suggesting you become fake or performative, but be intentional about aligning your nonverbal communication with your message. If you're telling someone you're confident in a decision while hunched over with crossed arms, avoiding eye contact and speaking in a shaky voice, which message do you think they'll believe? Your credibility also shows in how you handle being wrong. Because here's an uncomfortable truth. You will be wrong sometimes. Everyone is. The credible response isn't defensiveness or excuse-making. It's honest acknowledgement and learning. I watched a CEO completely preserve her credibility through a major mistake. The company had launched a product that failed spectacularly. Millions lost. Embarrassment all around. In the all-hands meeting afterward, she didn't spin it or blame others. She said simply, I made the call to launch. I was wrong. Here's what I learned and how we'll avoid this mistake in the future. Her credibility actually increased. Why? Because people saw integrity and accountability. They saw someone who could be trusted to be honest, even when it was costly. Compare that to leaders who never admit fault, always find excuses, or throw others under the bus. They might protect their ego in the short term, but they destroy credibility long term. Being able to say, I was wrong, is a superpower. It demonstrates security, honesty, and commitment to truth over ego. Another aspect of credibility is consistency in your standards. Do you hold yourself to the same expectations you have for others? Nothing destroys credibility faster than hypocrisy. If you demand punctuality but constantly run late yourself, people notice. If you talk about work-life balance but send emails at midnight expecting immediate responses, the disconnect is obvious. This doesn't mean you need to be perfect. It means your standards need to be consistent. If you struggle with something, acknowledge it rather than pretending you're above it. I have a colleague who is terrible at responding to emails quickly. But instead of pretending otherwise, she's upfront about it. Email is not my strength. If you need a fast response, text me. This honesty preserves credibility that pretending would destroy. Let's talk about how credibility intersects with vulnerability. This might seem contradictory. Doesn't being vulnerable undermine your credibility as an expert or leader? Actually, no. Strategic vulnerability enhances credibility. Strategic vulnerability means being honest about challenges, uncertainties, and limitations, while still maintaining competence in your core domain. It's the difference between I don't know anything and I don't know this specific thing, but here's what I do know, and here's how I'll find out what I don't. Or between I'm a mess and I struggled with this particular challenge, here's how I worked through it. When you're appropriately vulnerable, several things happen. First, you become more relatable. People connect with honest humanity more than polished perfection. Second, you demonstrate self-awareness, which is itself a form of credibility. It shows you're reflective and honest. Third, you create space for others to be honest too. This deepens relationships and increases trust. I watched a senior leader transform team dynamics by opening a meeting with, "I want to be honest. I'm worried we're not going to hit our targets this quarter. I've been losing sleep over it. What are you all seeing? What am I missing?" That vulnerability didn't undermine his leadership. It strengthened it by creating permission for honest dialogue. The team rallied with insights and solutions that wouldn't have emerged if he'd pretended everything was fine. But vulnerability has to be balanced with competence. If you're constantly expressing doubt and uncertainty without demonstrating any firm ground to stand on, credibility erodes. The key is being selectively vulnerable in ways that demonstrate self-awareness while maintaining core competence. Now, let me address something crucial. Building credibility. When you're new or young or otherwise lack traditional markers of authority. Maybe you're early in your career. Maybe you're entering a new field. Maybe you're younger than most people in the room. How do you build credibility without the benefit of experience or credentials? First, never apologize for or draw attention to your limitations. Don't start presentations with, "I know I'm new here, but," or "I'm probably wrong, but." Your youth or newness is already visible. Highlighting it just reinforces it as a negative. Instead, lead with what you do bring. Fresh perspective, current knowledge, unburdened thinking. These are genuine strengths. Second, demonstrate competence through preparation. If you can't lean on years of experience, lean on thorough research. Show up knowing more about the specific issue at hand than anyone else in the room. I watched a 23-year-old convince a room of executives to change strategy. She couldn't compete on experience, but she'd done meticulous research, anticipated every question, and presented insights none of them had considered. They didn't care about her age. They cared that she knew what she was talking about. Third, borrow credibility through association and references. When making claims, cite recognized experts. Research from the Harvard Business School shows, or according to industry analysis by. You're not pretending to be the expert. You're showing you've done the work of consulting actual experts. Fourth, build credibility incrementally. You don't need to establish complete authority immediately. Start with small wins. Deliver on small commitments. Contribute valuable insights in meetings. Over time, you build a track record. Patricia didn't walk in her first day as a trusted voice. She built it over 15 years of consistent contribution. You're starting that journey right now. Every interaction is an opportunity to make a deposit. Finally, find mentors and champions who can vouch for you. Having someone with established credibility introduce you or speak on your behalf transfers some of their credibility to you. This isn't manipulation. It's smart relationship building. And it's reciprocal. As you build your own credibility, you'll do the same for others. Let's talk about maintaining credibility under pressure, because the real test isn't when things are going well. It's when you're challenged, criticized, or dealing with failure. Your response in these moments reveals your true character and either reinforces or destroys credibility. When challenged, resist the urge to get defensive. Instead, get curious. That's interesting. Tell me more about your concern. This shows confidence and openness. When criticized, look for the valid point even in harsh feedback. I appreciate you raising that. You're right that I didn't consider X. Let me think about how to address it. When you fail, own it quickly and completely. Don't make excuses or shift blame. This didn't work. I take responsibility. Here's what I learned. These responses are hard. They require ego management and emotional maturity. But they're incredibly credibility building. I watched a project manager handle a failed initiative perfectly. When the executive team asked what happened, she didn't blame the team, the timeline, or unforeseen circumstances. She said, "I misjudged the scope. I should have pushed back on the timeline. I failed to communicate early enough that we were in trouble. These are my mistakes, and here's how I'll prevent them next time." Could she have found external factors to blame? Absolutely. But that would have preserved her ego while destroying her credibility. Instead, she took full responsibility, and her credibility actually increased because leaders saw someone with integrity and accountability. As we close this part, I want you to do something. Think about the 3 most credible people you know personally, not celebrities or distant figures, people in your actual life. What makes them credible? Is it their expertise, their integrity, their consistency, their communication style? Chances are it's a combination. They know their stuff. They do what they say. They show up the same way repeatedly. They communicate with confidence but remain open. Now here's the crucial insight. They weren't born this way. They built these qualities through deliberate practice and consistent effort. And you can too. Credibility isn't a personality trait you either have or don't. It's a reputation you build, action by action, day by day, interaction by interaction. Every time you follow through on a commitment, deposit. Every time you admit you don't know something, deposit. Every time you own a mistake, deposit. Every time you deliver quality work, deposit. Every time you maintain your standards under pressure, deposit. Over time, these deposits compound. What feels like slow progress becomes sudden recognition. People start introducing you as an expert. Your opinions carry weight. Your suggestions are taken seriously, not because you demanded it, but because you earned it. In our next part, we're going to explore something that transforms credible communicators into truly influential ones: emotional intelligence. Because here's what most people miss. Credibility gets you in the door. It makes people willing to listen. But emotional intelligence is what allows you to truly connect, to understand what's actually driving people's decisions, and to communicate in ways that resonate at a deeper level. You're going to learn how to read the subtle signals people send constantly, how to manage your own emotional responses in high-stakes situations, how to create the kind of emotional connection that transforms intellectual agreement into committed action. This is where influence becomes more than technique, where it becomes art. Ready to develop the emotional awareness that separates good communicators from exceptional ones? Let's dive in. I'll never forget the conversation that taught me emotions aren't obstacles to persuasion. They're the pathway to it. I was trying to convince my business partner to pivot our strategy. I had spreadsheets, market analysis, competitor benchmarks. The data was undeniable. Our current approach was dying slowly, and I had a clear alternative backed by solid evidence. I presented everything logically, thoroughly, systematically, and she said no. I was baffled, frustrated. The data was right there. How could she not see it? My mentor, Elena Vasquez, watched this unfold and pulled me aside afterward. "You're trying to convince her brain," she said, "but her resistance is emotional. Until you address what she's actually feeling, all your logic is just noise." "But feelings aren't rational," I protested. "We should make decisions based on facts, not emotions." Elena smiled. "That's exactly why you're struggling. Humans don't work that way. We feel first, then rationalize. You can have all the facts in the world, but if you haven't connected emotionally, you haven't truly persuaded anyone." She was right. And once I understood this, really understood it, everything changed. Let me share what I learned, because it's probably the most important insight in all of persuasion. Emotions aren't the enemy of good decision-making. They're the foundation of it. Think about your own life. When have you made important decisions purely on logic? Your career choices, your relationships, where you live, what you believe in. If you're honest, emotion played a huge role in all of them. Maybe you rationalize those decisions afterward with logical reasons. But the initial pull, the deep knowing, the sense of rightness, that was emotional. This isn't weakness. It's how humans are wired. Our emotional systems evolved over millions of years to help us navigate complex social environments and make rapid decisions with incomplete information. They're incredibly sophisticated, processing thousands of subtle signals we're not even consciously aware of. And here's the key. People make decisions emotionally, then justify them logically. So if you're only appealing to logic, you're missing the actual decision-making process. You're trying to convince the part of the brain that justifies choices instead of the part that actually makes them. This is what emotional intelligence is about. Understanding this emotional dimension of human interaction and learning to navigate it skillfully. Let me break down what emotional intelligence actually means, because it's one of those terms people throw around without really defining. Emotional intelligence has 4 core components: self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and relationship management. Self-awareness means understanding your own emotional state, recognizing what you're feeling and why, being honest about how emotions are influencing your thoughts and actions. Most people are shockingly bad at this. They are angry, but think they're just being direct. They're anxious, but call it being thorough. They're hurt, but label it disappointment. This lack of self-awareness creates problems because unrecognized emotions still influence behavior. You're being driven by feelings you won't acknowledge, which means you can't manage them effectively. I learned this during a difficult project. I was frustrated with a team member's performance and kept giving harsh feedback. I told myself I was just holding high standards. My colleague finally said, "You seem really angry with me. What's actually going on?" And I realized I wasn't angry about his work. I was anxious about the project timeline and taking it out on him. Once I recognized the actual emotion, I could address it appropriately instead of misdirecting it. Building self-awareness starts with simply pausing to check in with yourself. Throughout the day, especially before important interactions, ask, what am I feeling right now? Where is this feeling coming from? How might it be influencing my thinking? This sounds simple, but it's transformative. You start catching emotional reactions before they drive behavior. You create space between feeling and action. The second component is self-management, the ability to regulate your emotional responses, especially in challenging situations. This isn't about suppressing emotions. That doesn't work and actually makes things worse. It's about experiencing emotions while choosing how to respond to them. Think about the last time someone criticized your work or rejected your idea. What was your immediate emotional response? Probably defensive anger, hurt, or frustration. Low emotional intelligence means acting on those feelings immediately, snapping back, shutting down, or getting passive-aggressive. High emotional intelligence means feeling those emotions, recognizing them, and choosing a more constructive response. I notice I'm feeling defensive. That's normal. But I'm going to pause and really listen to this feedback because there might be something valuable here. I watched my friend David master this in real time. He'd pitched a project he was passionate about, and the leadership team tore it apart. I could see him tensing up, jaw clenching, but instead of arguing or withdrawing, he took a breath and said, I clearly haven't explained this well. Let me understand your concerns better. That pause, that moment of self-management between feeling and response, changed everything. Instead of a defensive argument, it became a productive conversation that actually improved the proposal. You can practice this skill starting today. When you feel strong emotion arising, especially negative emotion, try this. Name it. I'm feeling angry right now. Locate it. Where is this coming from? What triggered it? Pause. Take 3 deep breaths before responding. Choose. What response serves my actual goals here? This simple practice, repeated consistently, dramatically improves your ability to manage emotional responses. But self-awareness and self-management are only half of emotional intelligence. The other half is about understanding and navigating others' emotions. Social awareness means reading emotional cues in other people, picking up on what they're actually feeling, not just what they're saying. Because here's what most people miss. Communication is happening on 2 levels simultaneously. There's the content level, the actual words being spoken, and there's the emotional level, the feelings behind those words. When your partner says, I'm fine, in a clipped tone while avoiding eye contact, the content says one thing, but the emotional message says something completely different. If you only listen to the words, you're missing the actual communication. The same thing happens in professional contexts. A colleague says, that's an interesting idea, while crossing their arms and leaning back. The words are positive, but the body language screams skepticism. A client says, I need to think about it, while looking anywhere but at you. They're not really considering it. They're looking for a polite exit. Learning to read these emotional signals is like developing a superpower. You start hearing what people mean, not just what they say. And this isn't about manipulation. It's about genuine understanding. When you can accurately read someone's emotional state, you can respond to what they actually need rather than what they're claiming to need. I learned this watching my friend Lisa, who's incredible at reading people. We were in a meeting where a colleague was giving a detailed explanation of why a project was on track. The content was all positive, hitting milestones, meeting targets, everything fine. But Lisa leaned over and whispered, "She's worried about something." I looked more carefully. The colleague's voice was slightly higher than usual. She was speaking faster. Her hands were fidgeting. After the meeting, Lisa checked in privately. Turns out there was a major risk the colleague was afraid to mention in the group setting. Because Lisa picked up on the emotional signal, she was able to address the real issue before it became a crisis. How do you develop this kind of social awareness? Start by paying attention to nonverbal communication, body language, tone of voice, facial expressions, energy level. These often reveal more than words. Notice inconsistencies between what someone says and how they say it. Those gaps usually point to the real emotional truth. Ask yourself, what might this person be feeling right now? What needs or concerns might be driving their behavior? And here's something crucial. Different people express emotions differently. Some wear everything on their face. Others are more controlled. Cultural backgrounds, personality types, and past experiences all shape how people show emotion. The key is learning to read the specific people in your life. Your partner's stress signals might look completely different from your colleagues. Your boss's frustration might manifest differently than your friends. Pay attention to patterns. What does this specific person look like when they're anxious, when they're excited, when they're hiding something? Over time, you develop an almost intuitive sense of what people are actually experiencing emotionally, even when their words say something different. This brings us to the fourth component of emotional intelligence, relationship management. This is where everything comes together. You understand your own emotions. You can manage your responses. You can read others accurately. Now you use all of that to build stronger connections and navigate relationships more effectively. One crucial aspect of this is empathy. Not just understanding what someone feels, but genuinely caring about it. There's a difference between cognitive empathy, intellectually understanding someone's feelings, and emotional empathy, actually feeling with them. Both are useful, but emotional empathy creates deeper connection. When my friend was going through a divorce, I could have said, "That must be hard," while thinking about my to-do list. Cognitive empathy. Instead, I really sat with what he might be experiencing. The grief, the uncertainty, the feeling of failure. I let myself feel some of that, and when I spoke, it came from genuine connection rather than polite sympathy. He told me later that conversation meant more to him than anything else during that period. Not because I had solutions, but because he felt truly understood. That's the power of genuine empathy. It creates bonds that logic alone never could. And in persuasion, this matters enormously. When people feel that you genuinely understand and care about their perspective, their resistance drops. Not because you've manipulated them, but because you've created real connection. I watched this principle transform a tense negotiation. 2 teams were at an impasse over resource allocation. Both sides had legitimate needs and solid arguments. The conversation was going nowhere. Then one leader did something different. Instead of pushing her position, she said, "Before we continue, I want to make sure I really understand your concerns. It seems like you're worried about," and she outlined their perspective with genuine accuracy and care. The energy in the room completely shifted. Because they felt understood, they became willing to understand in return. The deadlock broke, and they found a creative solution that neither side had considered before. That's relationship management through empathy. Not giving in or abandoning your position, but creating the emotional foundation that makes collaboration possible. Another key aspect of relationship management is reading and responding to emotional atmospheres. The collective mood in a room or conversation. Have you ever walked into a meeting and immediately felt tension even though nobody had said anything? Or joined a conversation that just felt warm and open? That's emotional atmosphere. And skilled communicators learn to both read it and influence it. When you walk into a tense room, bringing in high energy and optimism without acknowledging the tension usually backfires. People feel like you're not reading the room. Instead, you might acknowledge it. I can feel there's some heaviness here. Before we dive into the agenda, does anyone want to address what's going on? This shows emotional intelligence. You're not pretending everything is fine. You're creating space for the actual emotional reality. Or sometimes the room needs energy shifted. Everyone's deflated and discouraged. You might share a genuine win, tell a story that reignites purpose, or simply bring authentic enthusiasm that reminds people why they care about this work. I saw a leader do this brilliantly. Her team had just lost a major client. Everyone was demoralized. In the debrief meeting, she started by validating the disappointment. "This sucks. We worked hard and it didn't pan out." "That's genuinely disappointing." Then she shifted. "And I want to tell you what I saw in this process. I saw creative problem solving. I saw people going above and beyond. I saw a team that cares deeply about excellence. We didn't win this one, but we showed what we're capable of. That matters." She didn't dismiss the negative emotion. She acknowledged it, then intentionally introduced a different emotional note: pride, capability, future possibility. The team's energy transformed, not because she manipulated them, but because she skillfully navigated the emotional landscape of the moment. Now, let's talk about how to use emotional intelligence specifically in persuasive situations. First, before any important persuasive conversation, get clear on emotional state, yours and theirs. What are you feeling going into this? Excited? Anxious? Frustrated? Those emotions will influence how you communicate. Recognize them so you can manage them. What might the other person be feeling? Are they stressed about something else? Excited about possibilities? Defensive about past decisions? Understanding their emotional starting point helps you approach the conversation skillfully. I learned this preparing for a difficult conversation with a client who was unhappy with our deliverables. My initial instinct was to go in defending our work, but I paused and thought about his emotional state. He was probably frustrated, maybe embarrassed that this wasn't going well, possibly worried about how he'd explain this to his own leadership. Understanding that changed my approach entirely. Instead of leading with defense, I led with empathy. I can imagine this situation is frustrating. Let's figure out what went wrong and how we make it right. That emotional acknowledgement created space for productive problem solving instead of defensive arguing. Second, match emotional intensity appropriately. If someone comes to you highly energized about an idea and you respond with flat analytical questions, you've created an emotional mismatch that feels like rejection, even if your words are supportive. Similarly, if someone is sharing something painful and you respond with cheerful optimism, it feels dismissive. This doesn't mean being fake or performing emotions you don't feel. It means being aware of the emotional channel you're communicating on and adjusting appropriately. When someone shares excitement, let yourself feel some of that energy. When they share concern, bring appropriate seriousness. This creates emotional alignment that makes communication flow naturally. Third, use emotional language strategically. Instead of, "This approach will improve efficiency by 15%. Try. Imagine how it would feel to leave work each day knowing you'd accomplished more without working harder. The first appeals to logic. The second creates an emotional experience of the benefit. Instead of, "Our competitor is gaining market share." Try. "We're watching opportunities slip away to people who aren't better than us. They're just faster to act." The second creates emotional urgency that pure data doesn't. This isn't manipulation. It's helping people connect emotionally with information that might otherwise remain abstract. Fourth, recognize and address emotional objections, not just logical ones. When someone resists your idea, they might offer logical objections. But often, the real resistance is emotional. "We don't have the budget" might really mean, "I'm afraid of the risk." "The timing isn't right" might mean, "I don't trust this will work." "We need more data" might mean, "I'm uncomfortable making this decision." If you only address the surface objection, you'll go in circles. You'll provide budget justifications or timeline adjustments, and new objections will keep appearing because you haven't touched the actual emotional concern. Instead, listen for the emotion beneath the objection. "It sounds like you have concerns about the risk involved. Tell me more about what worries you." When you address the real emotional concern, the surface objections often dissolve on their own. I watched a sales professional do this masterfully. A potential client kept raising different objections: price, features, implementation timeline. The salesperson could have spent hours addressing each one. Instead, she said gently, "I'm sensing some hesitation beyond these specifics. What's your biggest worry about moving forward?" Long pause. Then, "Honestly, I've been burned before by solutions that promised big and delivered small. I'm afraid of looking foolish again." There it was, the real objection. And it wasn't about price or features. It was about trust and fear of repeating a painful experience. Once that emotional truth was on the table, they could actually address it. The salesperson shared how they'd prevented that exact outcome with other clients, offered guarantees and milestones, and connected the client with similar customers who'd had positive experiences. That conversation led to a deal that the surface-level logical objections would have prevented. Fifth, create emotional resonance by connecting your ideas to what people already care about. People don't adopt new ideas in a vacuum. They filter everything through existing values, priorities, and concerns. If you're trying to convince someone to change processes at work, what do they actually care about? Maybe it's team morale. Maybe it's personal recognition. Maybe it's efficiency so they can leave on time. Maybe it's professional growth. When you connect your proposal to their existing emotional investments, it stops being about your idea and starts being about their values. I needed to convince my team to adopt a new project management system. I could have talked about features and capabilities all day. Instead, I talked to each person individually to understand what frustrated them about the current system. Then I showed specifically how the new approach addressed their particular pain points. For the person who hated missing deadlines, this gives you early warning when things are slipping. For the person who felt overworked, this makes workload distribution visible so we can balance better. For the person who wanted career development, this creates documentation of your contributions that's useful for reviews. Same system, personalized emotional connection. Adoption was nearly immediate because everyone saw how it served something they already cared about. Sixth, manage your own emotional state during persuasive conversations. This is harder than it sounds. When someone pushes back on your idea, when they misunderstand your point, when they seem unreasonable, emotional reactions arise. Frustration, defensiveness, impatience. These are natural, but if you act on them, you undermine your persuasive effectiveness. I've learned to notice these emotional surges and pause. Literally pause. Take a breath. Remind myself what I'm actually trying to accomplish. The goal isn't to win an argument. It's to find alignment. Anger or frustration won't get me there. This internal emotional management is invisible to others, but it dramatically affects outcomes. When you can stay centered and clear, even when conversations get difficult, you maintain persuasive effectiveness that emotional reactivity destroys. One practice that helps: reframing resistance as information rather than obstruction. When someone objects, instead of thinking they're being difficult, try they're showing me what concerns I need to address. This mental shift changes your emotional response. Instead of frustration, you feel curiosity. Instead of defensiveness, you feel appreciation for the insight. Now, let's talk about emotional intelligence pitfalls, ways people misapply these concepts. First pitfall, emotional manipulation. There's a dark side to emotional intelligence, using emotional awareness to manipulate people's feelings for your benefit at their expense. This might work short-term, but it's ultimately self-defeating. People can sense when emotion is being weaponized. Trust evaporates. Relationships corrode. Ethical emotional intelligence means using emotional awareness to create genuine understanding and mutual benefit, not to exploit vulnerabilities. Before any emotionally charged persuasive approach, ask yourself, am I trying to help this person make a decision that genuinely serves them, or am I just trying to override their judgment? If it's the latter, stop. Find genuine alignment or walk away. Second pitfall, overemphasizing emotion at the expense of logic. Emotional connection is powerful, but decisions need both emotional and rational components. Pure emotional appeal without logical substance is manipulation. The most effective persuasion combines both. Emotional resonance that makes people care, plus logical framework that makes the decision defensible. You want people thinking, this feels right, and it makes sense. Third pitfall, assuming you know what others feel. Emotional intelligence includes recognizing the limits of your perception. You can read signals, make informed guesses, but you can't actually know someone's internal experience. The solution: check your interpretations. It seems like you're frustrated. Am I reading that right? This shows emotional awareness while remaining humble about your ability to mind read. Fourth pitfall: emotional labor burnout. Being emotionally attuned to others is valuable but exhausting. If you're constantly managing everyone's emotions, absorbing everyone's stress, you'll burn out. Emotional intelligence includes boundaries. You can be empathetic without taking on everyone's emotional burdens. You can care without being consumed. As we close this part, I want to come back to my business partner and the conversation that started this section. After Elena's insight, I approached my partner completely differently. Instead of leading with data, I asked about her concerns. What was she worried about? What felt risky about changing direction? And she opened up. She'd built our current approach. Pivoting felt like admitting failure. She was worried about the team's reaction, about whether we could actually execute something new, about losing what we'd invested. None of that was in her logical objections, but all of it was driving her resistance. Once we addressed those emotional concerns, validating them, working through them together, the logical conversation became easy. We made the pivot, and it saved the company. Same data, same logic, different approach, different outcome. That's the power of emotional intelligence in persuasion. You now understand something most people never grasp. Persuasion isn't about overcoming emotions with logic. It's about understanding, honoring, and skillfully navigating the emotional landscape where decisions actually happen. In our final part, we're going to bring everything together and talk about mastery, not as a destination, but as a journey. You'll learn how to integrate all these skills into a natural, authentic approach that feels true to who you are. We're going to explore what it takes to become someone who doesn't just use persuasive techniques, but embodies persuasive presence. Someone who influences not through manipulation, but through genuine connection and authentic leadership. This is where the transformation becomes complete, where all the principles we've explored become part of who you are, not just what you do. Ready for the final leap? Let's finish strong. So here we are. You've journeyed through the psychology of influence, built your credibility foundation, developed emotional intelligence, and learned the mechanics of persuasion. But knowledge alone changes nothing. I've met countless people who knew everything about persuasion but couldn't influence their way out of a paper bag. Why? Because they treated it like a collection of techniques instead of an integrated way of being. Let me tell you what mastery actually looks like. Last month, I watched my friend Maria navigate an impossible situation. Her company was merging with a competitor, and her entire team was about to be restructured. Anxiety was off the charts. People were updating resumes, checking out emotionally, bracing for the worst. Maria called a team meeting. She didn't use fancy techniques or persuasive tactics. She just spoke honestly about the uncertainty, acknowledged everyone's fears, and shared her commitment to fighting for them while being realistic about what she could control. Then she did something unexpected. She asked each person to share one thing they wanted to preserve about their team culture as they moved forward. Not complaints or worries, just what mattered most to them. People opened up. They talked about psychological safety, about learning opportunities, about the friendship they'd built. And in that sharing, something shifted. The anxiety didn't disappear, but it transformed into collective determination. When the restructuring happened, Maria's team was the only one that stayed largely intact. Why? Because in her conversation with leadership, she could articulate exactly what made her team valuable, not in abstract terms, but in the specific language of what leadership cared about. She connected her team's values to the company's strategic priorities. She showed rather than claimed their effectiveness. She made it emotionally and logically clear that keeping this team together was the smart move. That's integrated mastery. She wasn't deploying techniques. She was being credible, emotionally intelligent, and strategically clear all at once, naturally. This is what you're building toward. Not a toolkit you consciously apply, but an integrated approach that becomes who you are. So how do you get there? First, recognize that mastery is a direction, not a destination. You don't arrive at some finish line where you've mastered persuasion. You commit to continuous growth, forever refining and deepening your capabilities. The experts I know who are genuinely masterful. They're still learning, still experimenting, still discovering new dimensions to explore. That hunger for growth is what keeps them effective. Second, practice integration. Don't compartmentalize these skills. Instead of thinking, now I'll use emotional intelligence or time to deploy reciprocity, think holistically about each interaction. What's the goal? What does this person need? What's the emotional landscape? What creates genuine alignment? Let all your knowledge inform your approach without becoming mechanical about it. Third, commit to ethical influence always. The techniques we've explored are powerful. You could absolutely use them manipulatively, but that path leads to hollow victories and corroded relationships. Instead, make this promise to yourself. I will only persuade toward outcomes that genuinely serve everyone involved. I will influence with integrity, even when manipulation would be easier. This ethical foundation isn't a limitation. It's what makes your influence sustainable and meaningful. Fourth, embrace failure as feedback. You will mess up. You'll misread situations, choose wrong approaches, say things you regret. That's not failure, that's learning. After difficult interactions, reflect honestly. What worked? What didn't? What would you try differently? This reflection turns experience into wisdom. Finally, remember why this matters. Persuasion isn't about winning arguments or getting your way. It's about creating connection, enabling collaboration, and making things happen that couldn't happen through individual effort alone. When you influence ethically and effectively, you don't just benefit yourself. You help others make better decisions. You build stronger relationships. You create positive change in your sphere of influence. That's the real reward. Not just getting what you want, but becoming someone who genuinely helps others while achieving meaningful goals. You've learned powerful principles. Now the work begins, integrating them into who you are through consistent practice and ethical commitment. This journey transforms you. You'll notice yourself reading situations more clearly, connecting with people more deeply, and navigating complexity with growing confidence. Your relationships will deepen, your career will expand, your impact will grow, not through manipulation, but through genuine mastery of influence. The person you're becoming, more persuasive, more connected, more effective, is already within you. These principles have simply given you the map to bring them forward. So take what you've learned, practice it daily, refine it constantly, and watch as your ability to influence with integrity transforms not just your outcomes, but your entire experience of human connection. The world needs ethical persuaders, people who can build bridges, create alignment, and inspire positive change. People who influence with wisdom and integrity. You're becoming one of them. The journey continues from here. Go make it happen.